They're working on the baptismal vows here, on collating them, and if I understand right.
Yeah, we didn't, it got all messed up. We've only got 2 sets at this point. So, but we will give it to people that want.
Okay.
Well, you emailed them to Alla. She has an email group.
Yeah, I can send all of you baptismal vows via email.
Okay.
If you don't get the copies right now.
Yeah.
Okay, what I wanted to say about them, though, is that the way we've been handling it when people start grappling with this is that you get your set of the vows and then you go through them on your own and mark where you have questions, and someone that has an understanding of the vows needs to come and either interact with you individually, but preferably as a group, and answer any questions along the way. So humanly, I think there's people in here that are going to want to follow through and get baptized. Therefore, we're going to have to make that process happen. And the process would include you first going through these vows, making sure you understand them, marking questions that you might have that you need clarification on, and then someone come and explain those questions if they can explain them. Get that all resolved, and then the secondary step is we have had more, as it's always the case, we've had lots of people over the past couple of months, not lots, but we've had people that want to be baptized, but for various reasons that just you couldn't do it, okay, because the people that know them know that this activity is still being carried out in their life or whatever, okay, so that's the step after we work through the doctrinal understanding. Is even if everyone says everyone wants to be baptized, then there's the responsibility of the church to make sure that those people that want to be baptized actually meet that qualification. So if we're going to do it, not if, but I'll get you a copy. We'll leave that burden on her. Then you personally go through and read through it and see what parts you do or don't understand that you have to have questions answered. And then in theory, someone like myself, or I think someone like a Tyler from our ministry, could come and, there's other people besides myself, is what I'm saying, that could come and work through how we understand these vows. One of the things that comes up in these vows, a regular question is, and I don't know the word for word vows, but there's things about not using drugs, AMA drugs, and that's a stumbling block for a lot of people, but they're reading into the vow itself more than it's intended. If you're on insulin because you got diabetes, you can read that vow and say, hey, they're telling me I need to quit taking insulin. Or, any of the above. The vows are not intended to say that. But the vows are intended to say that as Seventh-day Adventists, if you have a health issue that should be dealt with, that your first option should be dealing with natural remedies. But if it's not, if it's beyond that ability to be dealt with, I mean, a broken leg, you're gonna take some pain medicine while they're resetting that leg, and okay, so don't know that going in, because people have read that particular vow in there and they've come away with some of those conclusions. There's a couple of them like that, but I'm telling you that at this point I haven't seen. There's one of them, abstinence of from leavening agents. Okay, you'll see, and what that equates to, and lots of Seventh-day Adventists probably don't know the difference between baking powder and baking soda. All right, and that's the leavening agent that is being discussed in that passage. But just go into the spirit of prophecy and you'll see that is accurate to the health message. So anyway, work through that, figure out where you have questions, then we'll figure out how we can come and have you think, usually the ones that I've been involved with, you think you can come into a group and work through every vow with the group in an hour. But it never happens that way, okay? Because David's going to bring up a question no one's thought about, and when he brings that question up, it's going to spark a follow-up question in your mind. So it goes more than an hour. So, but ideally, it isn't something. I mean, you can, but I'd rather not do it on a Sabbath. So I'd rather be doing it on a Friday or a Sunday, and so we'll have to work through that detail. But first, you got to get the vows in your hands. You got to look at them, see if they're something that you're convicted are valid, or if maybe they're fanatical from your point of view. And then we'll have to set up some kind of a return here. And I'm not pushing anything about our return here or where it's at, but we've come to understand that Carl's home may be a nice spot for the next meeting. I'm not pushing anything on the people that put these things together, but most of us here, if I'm understanding it right, are staying in hotels. Not all of us, I guess, but most of us. So if we went to Carl's house, some of us would still have to be in hotels, but he does have a little bit of living quarters. But the next time we came, we would probably want to work through the vows, because if what we're saying is correct, we would want to, those of us that want to get baptized before November 9th. Okay, so the sand's running through the hourglass.
Question in that regard. Is it necessary that someone be here in person, or have you ever tried like conference call or something like that to kind of host a meeting?
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
the
at least to go
for the
through the document,
vows.
you know,
Yeah.
that rather than having someone have to come
Yeah, they'll
here.
wait.
That might expedite the
Yeah.
process, so
It'd be
we
much
can all
easier that way.
just kind of get together on a call and work through it. If there's any-
Yeah, you could do a general one, okay, but sometimes they'll come up where you have to go take an individual or maybe a married couple from the group and answer some questions privately. So yeah, we can try anything to make it happen where everyone's settled into what the vows represent in advance of the actual baptism. We're open to anything. It's roughly 940 miles from here to my house, so skipping 1900 round trip is not a problem for us.
We're good with phone calls.
But, and then it's, the other thing is that, I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have a camp meeting. I know we're going to have a camp meeting beginning of April, and I don't know of any baptismal candidates for that camp meeting, but I'm sure there will be. So we would be doing a baptism in April at that camp meeting, I'm pretty sure. We baptized 40 people at the last baptism.
How many days is our camp meeting? Is it 5 days?
I think it's Wednesday through Sunday, I think.
Okay.
In Arkansas.
In Arkansas, yeah.
It's not-
Um,
You guys? Oh.
Yeah, you come to 940 miles. Okay, so that's that part. This particular study up here is,
And I was going to say, if we're going to use the river by his house, we have to do it way before November 9 while the water is still warm. So it's going to be in the summertime.
Yeah.
We'll plan it. I'll email it.
Preferably.
do you know why Africans don't know how to swim?
Because in the rivers.
Because you don't want to get in the water in Africa because they're full of crocodiles and you're going to get ate. And when the last time that Tabo was in, I think it was Ethiopia, but it could have been one of the other African countries, the brethren there, they're going to do a baptism, and the brethren saying, let's just go down to the river and do baptism. And Tabo, who's an African, saying, no, we're not going to do it in the river, okay? And there have been times when there were baptisms being carried out in Africa where
Just
people,
recently
yeah.
we heard about it, where there was a death
We're-
from that.
Maybe we'll come to the ocean.
Virginia water is a little more friendly.
Yeah, but here we're not dealing with crocodiles, we're dealing with it's too cold or water moccasins or whatever. But and the only reason I said that about Africans not swimming, that's what the Africans told me. It's not derogatory. You live there, you don't. Tabo, I don't know why I'm telling this story, but Tabo's from Africa, and his family was a little bit affluent for Africans, so they had the ability to take vacations where they would.
He had a pool.
He had a pool, but they had ability to take vacations where they would rent a boat and go down these African rivers. And what they did, they had a cage that they would hang off the boat, and then you could get in the cage and swim along the boat, but there's no way the crocs could get through the cage. Okay. So, one of the things that's interesting here to me is that what I'm saying is that since 1863, and what I'm saying is 1863, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has taken the prophetic mantle as the horn of Protestantism in the United States. And since 1863, there has been 19 Republican presidents and 20 General Conference presidents. The next election for a General Conference president is in the year 2020. And the next election for the President of the United States is the year 2020. I find that a little bit, it's amazing, okay? But also, when the kingdom was divided, do you remember when the kingdom was divided? When the story of Jeroboam,
Yeah.
how many kings were there in the northern kingdom from Jeroboam the first to Hoshea the last?
10 or so.
There were 19. Okay, and in that same history, when the kingdom was divided from Rehoboam to Zedekiah, how many kings were there in the southern kingdom? 20. Okay, so when you're looking at this, there is a definite, in my mind, biblical connection. And there's all the African brethren. There's some brethren in Africa, in Zimbabwe, some of the other countries over there that are sharp. It blows my mind when I knew nothing about Africa. I still don't. Only been there this one time. But it blows my. I always thought that Africans would be these poor third world people that would probably generally be uneducated or whatever. But some of those guys over there, man, their aptitude, it just. I've been corrected on that. They're sharp. And some of them are taking up this, are dealing with this study of the presidents, and Tabo is connected with these guys, so Tabo's been teaching it as well. And there's much that you can teach that we're understanding about this. I'm just going to try to pull one nice little element out of it. And I told you when I started, and there's no reason that you would remember it, there's something in this that I want to share with you that just, personally, it's amazing. So, what I'm saying is, the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, the last Republican president, Trump, so you can take things about Abraham Lincoln and correlate it with what's going to happen with Trump. Abraham Lincoln frees the slaves. Slavery is going to return in the time period of Donald Trump. It begins in the Civil War. Sister White says there's going to be another Civil War. That's first and the last with Trump and Abraham Lincoln. You can also make the case that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So now you got the concept is, does Trump get assassinated, or does Trump, as the leader of the United States, represent that in Trump's presidency, the United States comes to an end as the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy? And I would think that's the case, because even though it's been covered up since the death of Abraham Lincoln, any fair reading of history knows that it was the Catholic Church that executed Abraham Lincoln. It was the Jesuits. So we know that when the United States is conquered, it's going to be conquered by the Catholic Church. Verse 41 of Daniel 11. So the Catholic Church is going to bring the United States to an end at the time period when the last Republican president is president. And that probably is what the assassination of Abraham Lincoln is pointing forward to. And you can go on and on with that, but I'm going to take one snippet here. Okay, so what I'm saying is, when we get to these either Republican presidents or presidents of the General Conference, that when we come to the final history, we've already understood, based upon the seven thunders, that the seven thunders, that these seven last kings of Judah that represent the history of 1798 to 1844, which is the seven thunders of Revelation 10 that was sealed up, that these very same kings represent the very same reform line in our history. By that I mean Manasseh would be 1989, and these seven kings would represent a history that begins in 1989 and goes to the Sunday law. You follow me? Okay, so knowing that the history of 1989 to the Sunday law is illustrated by these last seven kings, and knowing that here at the Sunday law you're going to be at the time period where you have the last General Conference President and the last President of the United States, gives you at least the prophetic opportunity to say, can you go to the Sunday law and take these seven waymarks that are the seven thunders and put either the last seven presidents of the United States on this line? And you certainly can. We did it with the presidents of the United States. But can you take the last seven General Conference presidents and put them on this line? And yes, you can, okay? And when you do so, you find characteristics about these Judean kings that correspond with the characteristics of the General Conference presidents, okay? And of course, this gets you in trouble with any Seventh-day Adventist that is watching this material, because all they can see is criticism and they don't understand the prophetic structure. But we're not of that mindset, so there's still, I'm going to take a limited approach. I want to show you one element that kind of blows my mind here. Of these kings, of the 19 kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, how many of Israel's 19 kings were good kings?
One.
Which one?
Josiah.
No, this is southern kingdom. Which king in the northern kingdom was a good king? None. The Bible doesn't give testimony that any of these 19 kings were good. They're bad from beginning to end. But in Judea, there are some good kings that pop up along the way. And this is Judea, the last seven Judean kings. Of these last seven Judean kings, which of them, if any, can you call a good king? Josiah. But he's not quite a good king. He still fails, right? And why does he fail?
He didn't mind God.
He dies at Megiddo.
Yeah, he died.
He died at Megiddo. Why was he at Megiddo?
Because he aligned himself with the northern,
He wasn't supposed to be
with the
in that
king.
battle.
Yeah, with the king of the north.
Okay, this is all true, but the king of the south is heading into a battle with the king of the north, and he tells Josiah, stay out. The Lord has sent me into this war. Keep out of it. And Josiah says, no, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get involved with that battle, and he ends up dying, okay? So where is the war between the king of the north and the king of the south at the end of the world? Where's the warning message of the war between the king of the north and the king of the south at the end of the world? Because that's what Josiah received. He received a warning about the war between the king of the north and the king of the south, and he rejected that warning, and he ends up dying in Megiddo. Daniel 11. You got to see this. Josiah rejects the warning that is found in the message of the king of the north and the king of the south, because Pharaoh Necho is heading into war. Pharaoh Necho is the king of the south in that time period that Josiah is king, and he's heading off to battle with the king of the north. He tells Josiah, stay out of this war. The Lord has sent me into this war. And Josiah rejects the warning message about the war between the king of the north and the king of the south, and he dies. Okay, now, prophetically what you need to see, if you will, and I'm thinking about how how far back I have to go to put this in place for you, but go to 1 Kings 13. This is where the story of Josiah begins. This is the story I mentioned here a minute ago about the disobedient prophet. And I heard Carl explaining it here in the break a little bit. In verse 1 of chapter 13 of 1 Kings, it says, "And behold, there came a man of God out of Judah by the word of the Lord unto Bethel, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense." This is a prophet from Judah coming to Jeroboam, who's the king of the 10 northern tribes. He just become king. This is right at the very beginning. And he's going to institute, Jeroboam, false worship in Israel at two places, Bethel and Dan. And this prophet from Judah is going to come and rebuke him for doing that, because even if the kingdoms were separated, the people in the north and those 10 northern kingdoms, when they did worship, they were supposed to go down to Jerusalem to worship. And so Jeroboam's setting up a counterfeit worship service, and he gets rebuked. Verse 2 says, this is his prophecy, this prophet. "And he cried against the altar, and the word of the Lord said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord." When would this passage become present truth? Second angel's message, midnight cry. O altar, altar. Okay. "Thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name." So this is the prophecy of Josiah, who we've been speaking about. And what does Josiah mean? Foundation. Foundation. Okay. "And upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee." The thee there is who? It's not Jeroboam, it's the altar. Okay, this is a curse against this counterfeit worship. Now, if you get into, when you deal with Revelation 8:1 and the opening of the seventh seal, and you go through the prophetic characteristics there in Revelation 8:1 through 5, the opening of the seventh seal, the angel's going to go to the altar and take coals from off the altar and cast them down to the earth. So you want to explain what the altar represents when you're teaching that in that passage in Revelation 8:1. So when we've taught that, what we've discovered in the Spirit of Prophecy, what is the true altar? What does Sister White say the true altar is? It's Christ. She says it in black and white. The true altar is Christ. So what is this? What's this curse against? A false Christ, a counterfeit Christ. Okay. And verse 3 says, "And he gave a sign the same day, saying, This is the sign which the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be rent, and the ashes that are upon it shall be poured out. And it came to pass, when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, Lay hold on him. And his hand which he put forth against him dried up, so that he could not pull it in again to him. The altar was rent." Josiah just said, this is going to be this, not Josiah, this prophet from Judah has just said, this is the sign that's going to take place. Now the sign is taking place, okay? "The altar also was rent, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord." Now this is a rebuke against this false worship. It's a rebuke against Jeroboam. It's also the beginning of a prophecy, because it's predicting that Josiah would be born in the future. So this is the beginning of the Josiah prophecy, if you can say it like that. Therefore, if there was a sign at the beginning of the prophecy, when Josiah is finally born, what would you expect to see? A sign. Okay, in fact, I'm going to suggest that Josiah is the sign. Okay, because I'm also going to suggest, and we're not going to deal with it here, that God purposely, absolutely purposely named Josiah Litch Josiah in order to connect with King Josiah. And you can connect King Josiah with Josiah Litch through the number 391. Okay, we can't go there, but there's a direct connection between King Josiah and Josiah Litch. And the connection includes the foundation, because the name Josiah means foundation. And in our movement, the foundational work began in 2001. Essentially, the foundation is finished being built by 2014. But so in the history from 2001 to 2014, the foundational work of our movement has taken place. And in that history, in 2005, the 2520 comes to light. And when it comes to light, then we begin to understand the implications of Josiah. Other things too. But Josiah is definitely part of the 2520, because when he begins as king to work a reform, the high priest discovers in the temple that they're trying to clean up the writings of Moses, but it's the curse of Moses. And this causes Josiah to attempt the Reformation. Do you all know that story? Say amen if you know that story. Amen. Okay, because you got to know that story. One of the characteristics of Josiah is he attempts a reformation. It wasn't complete though, it was too late. They're already in their progressive fall that's going to lead them into captivity down here with Zedekiah. It begins with Manasseh, so it's too late, but nevertheless, when that high priest discovered the curse of Moses in the temple, he's typifying 2005 when the 2520 is rediscovered in our history. Now when the 2520 is rediscovered in our history, shortly thereafter we begin to recognize how Josiah ties in with that. So Josiah returns into our history in 2005, thereafter, and that's the history of our foundation. And Josiah means foundation. And Josiah Litch's prophecy came to pass on August 11th, 1840, and that's when the foundation of Millerite history is laid. So Josiah is about the foundation. And Josiah Litch is connected with King Josiah, and it all begins back here with Jeroboam in 977 BC. So, what was I wanted you to know, I want you to see, that of these kings, the last 7 kings of Judah, the only one that has any possibility of being identified a good king would be Josiah. And essentially, most of his life, you got to say good king, good king, good king, but he blew it there at the end. And he blew it because he rejected the message of Daniel 11:40 to 45. He rejected the warning message of the war between the king of the north and the king of the south. The reason that I'm emphasizing this is I want you to see that the prophet here in chapter 13, he's the disobedient prophet. Why do we call him the disobedient prophet? He's the one that after he gives this rebuke to Jeroboam, he has been told, go straight back to Judah and don't go any other place. But he goes and he eats with this Sumerian false prophet, and then he dies between the ass and the lion. And what he's representing at the beginning of this prophecy of Josiah, the prophet that gives the prophecy, he dies illustrating the rejection of the message of Daniel 11:44, the tidings out of the east and the north. But in that history, he's predicting King Josiah, and King Josiah also dies the same way by rejecting the message of Daniel 11:40 to 45. So I want you to see the connection there, that this history is present truth for us because none of us have lived except in the history of verse 40. Verse 40 begins in 1798. It goes to the Sunday law in the United States. Present truth for us is verse 40. And verse 40 is the warning message that is present truth for this history. And King Josiah and the disobedient prophet both are examples of those in political leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, King Josiah, and religious leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the disobedient prophet. Both elements reject the message of Daniel 11:40 to 45 at the end of time. Okay, so but in saying all that, I want us to remember that of all these kings, Josiah is a good king at one level. All right, he tempts a reformation. So let me dig out my notes here. The last time I did this, I started down this presentation, and then I realized I didn't have my notes. I don't think I'm in that situation this time. I have all my notes. So it's probably in my briefcase. I don't know that I need to. I have it. I have it. You can get on the internet and download the General Conference Presidents of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's all this is this is from the SDA website. So the first, what this is, these next few note pages are the General Conference Presidents. The first one's John Byington, and it goes down through. But what I'm going to point to is the last 7. And I'm going to say the last 7 General Conference Presidents can line up with this history here, our history, the history of the 7 thunders in the Reform movement of the 144,000. So what that means, and this is where it gets dicey in terms of someone watching this that doesn't have the prophetic aptitude to understand what I'm saying. This would be Ted Wilson here. And this would be Jan Paulson. And this would be Falkenberg. This would be, who would this be? Was it you that said that? This is Ted's dad.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the 7 thunders, when the Lord opened up the 7 thunders, and the Lord opened up the 7 thunders 1995, 96, that's how long we've been handling this. We didn't understand anything in 1995 compared to what we understand now. But I remember when I was working at Hope International, and that's in that time frame, that everything that we presented there, they fought against at that ministry. And there was one personality that was the main champion to oppose anything that I would suggest. And I can remember having long, drawn-out arguments with this medical doctor that worked there over a passage where Sister White says, commenting on Revelation 10, that the 7 thunders represent a delineation of events that would transpire under the first and second angel's message. And in the same passage it says the 7 thunders represent future events that will be disclosed in their order. And I'm saying, look at, she's saying the 7 thunders is Millerite history and our history, and he's arguing right and left. So I'm only telling you that story because I know it was from that history when we began to grapple with what the 7 thunders represented. But now it's expanded so much that maybe you're not familiar with what I'm going to tell you here, but you need to go back and get familiar if you're not familiar. These 7 waymarks here that occur many places can be used to express different prophetic truths. What I mean by that is there's a way to approach the 7 thunders and show 4 of these kings as a unit. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 3 can be understood all by themselves. The justification for these 3 being 1, 2, 3 is Jehoiakim, Chin, and Zedekiah. They're all confronted by Nebuchadnezzar, okay? And ultimately Nebuchadnezzar is going to destroy Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a symbol of the Sunday law. And the fact that Nebuchadnezzar deals with Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and then finally destroys Jerusalem with Zedekiah allows us to see that the prophetic symbolism of these last 3 kings are the 3 angels' messages. Okay? Kim, Chin, Zedekiah are the 3 steps of the Sunday law. Okay? So you can take these 7 kings, which are the 7 thunders, and you can take the last 3 kings and derive truth just from what these three kings represent. But we came to understand, because of the 25:20, that there are four times in Leviticus 26 where the expression 7 times is marked, and that the first time the 7 times is marked in Leviticus 26, it was fulfilled by Manasseh. And the second time, the prophecy, the prophetic information associated with the second time that the 7 times is expressed in Leviticus 26 is Jehoiakim. The third time is Chin. And the fourth time is Zedekiah. Because of that, because of Leviticus 26, then we can go into these 7 kings and we can say it's 7 thunders, 7 waymarks, or it's 4 waymarks that are typifying Leviticus 26 4 times, it's 7 times is expressed. Is everyone with me on that? Or you can take the last 3 and be the 3 angels' messages leading up to the Sunday law. When you take these 4, okay, which would be Manasseh, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah, they represent the 4 generations. Okay, because this would be Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Pergamus and Thyatira, Pergamus and Thyatira. Or this would be the image of jealousy in Ezekiel 8, the secret chambers of Ezekiel 8, the weeping for Tammuz of Ezekiel 8, or the bowing down to the sun. And you can bring several other illustrations of 4 to these 4 generations. Why do we need to even deal with 4 generations? Because of Abram. The prophecy of Abram in Genesis 15 says all this stuff takes place in the 4th generation. 4th generation becomes an important symbol at the end because we're in the 4th generation. So, Manasseh, what does Manasseh, just to give you an example of how these things tie together, what does Manasseh mean? Forget, forgotten. And Ephesus, the first church, which lines up with Manasseh, what do? They forgot their first love. They Manasseh their first love. The image of jealousy, what's the image of jealousy? In Ezekiel 8, image of jealousy, secret chambers, weeping for Tammuz, bowing to the sun, all of these abominations are counterfeit religious manifestations. Easy one to see, bowing to the sun, it's a counterfeit of. Weeping for Tammuz, what's that? False latter rain. This is the story of weeping for Tammuz in paganism, where these teardrops are supposedly going to bring back to life the dead child. Okay, so this is the counterfeit latter rain. Secret chambers. What is that? In Matthew 24, Jesus says, they'll tell you go into secret chambers. Follow them not, or something along that line. But you all know the passage. When Sister White comments on that in Great Controversy, she identifies those secret chambers as spiritualism. This is spiritualism, the secret chambers. And although there are many correct ways to identify spiritualism, no doubt, in this movement the way we do it is by saying when someone puts their word above God's word, they're into spiritualism. Okay. The image of jealousy has to be, it's a counterfeit religious manifestation. Don't jump ahead. Okay. Because you jumped over part of it. Okay. Okay, if you want to go in this. Where's the counterfeit image?
Don't be cocky.
No, okay. When the meeting breaks up, we'll get into it. Where's the first illustration of the image of jealousy? The golden calf. Okay, but where's the image of jealousy there? The golden calf's a counterfeit. I said, where's the first illustration of the image of jealousy? And you said the golden calf, and I'm saying that this image of jealousy, it's a counterfeit of a truth. Where's the first illustration of the true image of jealousy? What is the true image of jealousy?
Heaven and Satan.
No, the true image of jealousy is the Ten Commandments. Really? The two tables. Okay, because of the second commandment. That's what she threw in. The second commandment says, the Lord thy God is a jealous God, and he's going to bring his judgment upon to what generation? Third and fourth generation. Okay, so if you ask a Seventh-day Adventist which commandment identifies God's character, most of the time they're going to answer fourth. But that's not what identifies God's character. That's what identifies his redemptive and creative power. The commandment that identifies his character is the second commandment, where he says, I am a jealous God. Okay? So Moses is receiving the true image of jealousy, the two tables of the Ten Commandments, and he's coming down off the mountain, and there's Aaron making a counterfeit image of jealousy. What is it? The golden calf. What does Jeroboam put in Bethel and Dan? Two golden. He doubles down on that rebellion. Okay? So the image of jealousy is the counterfeit of the Ten Commandments, of God's character. Okay, because he's a jealous God. So these two tables were typified by the two tables of the Ten Commandments. So in Millerite history, the image of jealousy is these two tables. Yes? Mm-hmm. You follow me? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happened in Millerite Adventism in 1863? They set up the image of jealousy by introducing the 1863 table to replace these two tables. And Habakkuk 2, Sister White says this table and this table is a fulfillment of Habakkuk 2. She directly says that about both of these charts. And Habakkuk 2 says of these charts that fulfilled Habakkuk 2, it says, write the vision and make it plain that he may run that what? Readeth it. You can come up here, and if you're my age, you better have your glasses, and you can read these charts. The 1863 chart, there isn't anything you can read on it at all. It's a counterfeit. It's not a fulfillment of Habakkuk 2. And it's, how's it go in Habakkuk 2? Write the vision and make it plain.
On the table.
What? Tables, it's plural. Okay, so the 1863 chart was singular. Okay, but it came out with an explanation with it. If you're going to buy the chart, then you buy the explanation also. All right?
46 pages.
And that explanation's 46 pages long.
46, right?
So it's a counterfeit. All right. So these here are counterfeits, and what I'm saying is this: they also represent the first, second, third, and fourth generation of Adventism. And in the first generation of Adventism, you have 1863 when this took place, the image of jealousy, and then in 1888 they reject Jones, Wagner, Sister White, the Holy Spirit, the Bible. And I'm not just throwing those out. I can back that up with thus saith the Lord. And they put their word above God's word, and they go into spiritualism, which is secret chambers. And in the third generation, 1919, begins the third generation with W.W. Prescott's book, and his changing the definition of Christ as a Christ that has no prophetic ability, introduces a new Christ into Adventism. Apostate Protestantism Christ is what was introduced. And when you have that theology as your point of reference, as your methodology, then how you define the latter rain is turned totally upside down. Okay, so this is the false latter-rain message comes from this introduction of apostate Protestantism theology, of which W.W. Prescott is a symbol. I mean, W.W. Prescott was a legitimate theologian that had his degree from the colleges. What colleges? Protestant colleges. Okay, he's a representative of apostate Protestantism, and from this point on, these last two generations, Adventism is suffering from external problems that are coming from apostate Protestantism. These two generations, we did it to ourselves. And then when we get down here to 1957, and the darkness that follows leading up to the time of the end, we're in the time period where people no longer know what the truth of the Bible is. That's why the symbol of that history is the book Questions on Doctrine. They no longer understand Bible truth, and in that sense they have prepared a methodology that's going to allow them to justify accepting the mark of the beast when the Sunday law comes. So you can take, what I was trying to illustrate to you, but it really wasn't my main point, is these seven thunders can be used as a symbol in a variety of ways. Sometimes just as 7 waymarks, sometimes as 3, sometimes as 4. And I want to first point you to these 4 and say that these 4 are a symbol of Adventism too. My prophetic justification for doing that is because of this guy. Okay, this guy is the 4th. If you just go back like this, he's the 4th from here. And who's this? This is his dad. So who's this? It's a 4th generation at that level, okay? So at that level, you can apply it that way. So these final 4 kings, you can look at them, General Conference presidents, as 4 generations. And you know, I've got to pick and choose how much needs to be said here, but I'll deal with it. It's not important what I said, and this is what popped into my mind. I was thinking about whether I should say it. And probably I shouldn't say it when I have to think about whether I should say it. But when this guy became General Conference President, I didn't know him from the man on the moon, and I still don't. The first thing that popped into my mind is if he was really going to be a man of God, he had to do something. First thing he had to do. The first thing he had to do is he had to come before God's people, and he had to say, I'm going to serve you as General Conference President, but I need to let you know right off the bat that I reject the claims that my father made, that they were wrong. They were darkness, and I don't accept it. He didn't do that. I couldn't. I apologize for taking that position, but he needed to do that because this guy, he made some claims about Adventism, about the truth about God that are just, they need to be cleaned up or whatever. Okay, let me read them to you. This is from a court case. And by the way, let me do one more thing. The nice thing about downloading these General Conference presidents, I don't know if it's a nice thing, but let me just have my dates correct before I make this claim. He's going to start being General Conference President in 1979. What's 1979?
It's the starting of the Afghan war.
It's the beginning of the 10-year proxy war that is the final opportunity for Adventism to wake up to the implications of Daniel 11:40-45. This is where Josiah is going to die at Megiddo and where the disobedient prophet's going to die, because he's going to refuse this information from 1979 to 1989. So when we mark the beginning of this, this is where it's at. It's in this 10 years leading up to 1989. And in that history, he's called into a court case as a legal representative of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is one of the things that he says in this court case. And you know, when I give you a reference for a Bible reference or Spirit of Prophecy or whatever, some of them get kind of long, but this is much too long, okay? From here to here, this is the reference because it's a court transcript, and it's you know, United States versus Seventh-day Adventist Church Equal Employment Opportunity Commission versus the Pacific Press Published Association and the General Conference reply brief for defendants, page 4, civil case 711 CBR, presided over by, so I'm not going to put it on the board, all right? But I'm going to tell you what he said under oath as a legal representative of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And he did this in 1974. It says, although it is...
79.
79.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why I have that down there like that. But although it is true that there was a period of time, in the life of the Seventh-day Adventist Church when the denomination took a distinctly anti-Roman Catholic viewpoint, that attitude on the Church's part was nothing more than a manifestation of widespread anti-popery among conservative Protestant denominations in the early part of the century and the latter part of the last, and which has now been consigned to the historical trash heap so far as the Seventh-day Adventist Church is concerned. That's the legal position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is we don't have a problem with the man of sin and the Antichrist of Bible prophecy. Okay, so, and that is the third angel's message. You've thrown the third angel's message in the trash because the warning against the mark of the beast is the warning against the mark of the papacy. Yes. All right, so that's why I'm saying when Ted takes office, the first thing he has to do, even if it hadn't been his father, he would have had to do it, but it was even his father. It was more important that he should have said, the claim my daddy made about the papal power, I reject. Did you hear him do that? No, what you heard him promise as he was leading up to accepting his presidency is that he was going to clean up spiritual formation. You've heard that, you can read that promise. Yet he was on the committee that promoted and put into place spiritual formation, and as he's seeking to be the General Conference president, he says he's going to clean it up. Has it been cleaned up since 1989 or since 9/11? Okay, so anyway, politician. His dad, Neil, also said in the Adventist Review, March 5th, 1981, he said, there's another universal and truly Catholic organization. There is another universal and truly Catholic organization, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, there's one other thing that he says that really bugs me, that Neil said that bugs me. And I taught this within the past few months, and then I think it was my daughter, but someone at the ministry. I couldn't find the other quote that I want to share with you. And they went and Googled it and they found it. So I have it in my email. But Neil doesn't brag, but he liked to tell people that when it came to him being the president of the General Conference, that he liked to call his vice presidents, because there's more than one vice president, what do you suppose that he liked to call his vice presidents, and he would tell people that he likes to call them that?
Bishops.
Cardinals. Oh, okay, so this guy here, I'm saying that when he comes into office, he's a counterfeit pope. He needs to distance himself from his daddy's activities. You follow me? Okay, so this guy. All right, so what I'm saying is that Neil Wilson if you're going to treat it, that you have the prophetic authority to take the seven thunders and derive different symbols from it. We've done it with 3. We did it with the 4 here. And I'm saying these last 4 General Conference presidents, that we can treat them as the last 4 generations, because you got these 4 presidents and you got the first and the last. Wilson and Wilson. Father, Son. So the claim... What's the mark of the papacy? Let's put it that way. Sunday. Okay, so the idea that we would throw away the 2 tables and replace them with the 1863 chart has been illustrated by Aaron making the golden calf and Moses breaking the 10 commandments. So what I'm saying is his position here about his attitude towards the Antichrist of Bible prophecy qualifies as this, because he is replacing the true Christ with the false Christ in terms of lifting up the Pope of Rome as an acceptable entity. Falkenberg, the next General Conference president, what can you tell me about Falkenberg? You don't have to. I'll tell you what I want to do with Falkenberg. He's the only General Conference president that was forced to resign. There was a time period where I worked with a brother, one of the few people that have separated from working with us, where there really wasn't any public animosity, although we don't communicate anymore. He was the Lord used him to take the very first Adventist Bible studies into the Soviet Union when it collapsed. He lived in Minnesota. There was people that escaped the Soviet Union from Russia, but they were here, but they were seeking asylum, so they weren't legal citizens at that point in time. And because they weren't legal citizens, this is before the Soviet Union collapsed, they didn't have green cards to make money, and they were living in his community. So in order to try to give them some working capital while they were there, he's always been a nice guy. He asked them if they wanted to translate these Adventist Bible studies from English into Russian, and they agreed. So he was doing it just to help these people out. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, okay? So this is going on before 1989, 91. So when that happened, he went to the General Conference, and he says, look, I have our Adventist Bible studies already translated into Russian. Let's get them into the Soviet Union. And they said, well, hand them off to us. We'll have our Russian experts check it, and if so, we'll use them. So they did it. The General Conference accepted those Bible studies, checked the Russian, and said, okay, we're ready to use them. And he says, okay, give me a copy of what you're going to use. I want my copy too, but you go do it. And when he looked at what they had done, any reference to the Antichrist of Bible prophecy and Sunday sacredness and the third angel's message had been taken out of the Bible studies. And he said, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. That's the main meat I want in those Bible studies. He says, I'm going to have to figure out how to get these Bible studies into the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, on my own. And he knew a black guy in Adventism who at that time had the largest prison ministry work in the United States, probably still does. And he connected with him, and that black brother, Adventist brother, was the one that took the Bible studies into the former Soviet Union. And for several years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, if you were a Seventh-day Adventist, you were hearing about the wonderful response they were having in Russia to the Advent message. It was coming from this black pastor that was using the complete translated Bible studies that this guy had put together. And so this, I'm purposely not using names, okay? And I'm purposely calling this prison ministry leader a black prison ministry leader because he was black, but I want to make a point. Because he has the biggest, had at that time, the biggest prison ministry work in Adventism, he went into the prisons in the Soviet Union. That's where you're hearing all the stories. It's from the message going into the prisons. But he was well known in Adventism, so he sat on the General Conference Committee. Okay, and on the General Conference Committee, I guess it's kind of like the Congress. In the Congress of the United States, they have the Black Caucus. They have they're all congressmen, but the black people get together and they have their own little core called the Black Caucus. And I don't think they have that in the General Conference, but from what I've understood from this black prison ministry guy, there is a certain amount of black guys at that time that were on the General Conference Committee that also, for whatever reason, they had their own little clique, which is what people generally do, okay? And his testimony is that the black guys in the General Conference, they thought that they shouldn't have allowed Falkenberg to resign because he should have just been sent to prison. And it's only because the General Conference interceded with the government of the United States that the government of the United States allowed him to resign and step out. And the black guys on the General Conference Committee, what he had done was so open to them that they thought he should have just been put in prison. Okay, but Adventism doesn't know much about that. Okay, but one of the things, this is just a quick Google search about Falkenberg. The General Conference president 2 times before, only one that's ever resigned. This is from the Los Angeles Times, February 2nd, 1999. And then, of course, if what I'm saying is true, then you got to read between the lines a little bit. The international head of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, dogged by questions about his financial ties to his Sacramento investor, resigned his post Monday after nearly a decade at the top of the 10 million member church. Robert S. Falkenberg, the son of missionary parents and president of the fast-growing denomination since 1990, told associates that the controversy over his financial dealings was detracting from God's work. You ever heard one of these politicians saying, all these things, these charges against me are detracting from my ability to serve as a politician, so I'm going to step down, okay? Next paragraph. Falkenberg, 58, had become entangled in a messy lawsuit filed last August by Sacramento businessman James E. Moore, who alleges that Falkenberg and other Adventist officials cheated him and a charitable trust out of $8 million in promissory notes in a land deal in El Dorado County. That's just one. That's just one, okay? There was much financial irregularities that were going on in the General Conference during that time period. But as Seventh-day Adventists, we didn't know about it. We barely knew it. He's the only one that resigned. That's all we know. There are people that you know that are on our board. I'm purposely not naming their name either. The people the Lord used to connect this message with you guys that live in California now. She went to school with Falkenberg's wife. So early on, she actually sent some of this material to them because she still knows them, but they haven't. You can talk to her. They haven't had a good response for quite some time. But I'm pretty sure this is what I learned from her. Okay, but if not, I learned it from someone else. She knows where these people live, and where they live when he steps out of the General Conference presidency is in an Adventist community in Florida, okay, where the General Conference people that retire, many of them will end up in this Adventist community in Florida that's around a golf course. Okay, got to be a golf course, but the point is how can a pastor amass the money that necessary to buy one of these homes on a golf course in Florida when they retire? Okay, so anyway, that's just some added peripherals. But you and I, even the little bit I'm telling you here, we still don't know what went on in that history. There was another court case connected with that history where there was an accountant from the General Conference that got into shenanigans with them and was suing them, and that accountant actually stayed in Kathy and I's home one time, and he told us what went on when he was the accountant for the General Conference, and he was wrapped up in a big lawsuit, same kind of information. So what went on with Falkenberg was secret. Secret chambers. Okay, so you just, when you look in detail at these things, you can see that there isn't any any wresting of anything that we're seeing. We're just reading it as it lays out.
What's it say, wickedness in high places?
Yeah, spiritual wickedness in high places. So
Clearly.
Paulson's a European. Okay, not very often that you have someone outside the United States become a General Conference president. But I came into Adventism out of the world. I didn't know anything, and shortly, not too long thereafter, 19 years, we're working in self-supporting ministry. But when I grew up, I didn't know anything about Catholicism I didn't know anything about anything. So everything I've learned about Catholicism, apostate Protestantism, I've learned as an Adventist. And when I went to Hope International and began public ministry, Hope International and Heartland over here, their whole purpose at that time was to expose the apostasy in the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's what they were there for. And the apostasy that they were fighting against was the new theology that was primarily represented by Desmond Ford during that history. But there were other prominent men that were of the ilk of Desmond Ford. And in that time period, when I was there, I got a crash course on these issues connected with Desmond Ford's teaching, his new theology, the nature of Christ, the nature of man, sin. And that's where I was educated on it as a human being. And you become familiar when you worked at Hope International and working with Heartland of the famous theologians in Adventism that promoted this false teachings. And there's some of those that if you don't look closely, you don't realize how influential they are. And what I mean by that, most of you, if I'd say Leroy Froome, you probably have reason to understand why Leroy Froome is a bad guy in our history. He's the one that opens the door to the book Questions on Doctrine in 1957. He's the one that hides this in Andrews University because he doesn't want you to understand what the truth about the daily is. So there's certain characters in our modern Advent history, and you got to ask yourself something, because I'm seeing the smiles and all, and I get it. But when God's laying out the kings and the high priests, the religious leaders in the Old Testament, does He name them by name? Yeah, He names them by name. Does He tell what they did? Yeah, He doesn't hide anything. So would He do the same with the kings at the end?
Yes.
Would He name the presidents of the United States and the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church at the end? So I want you to think about it, that this isn't someone just trying to throw dirt. This is consistent with from the whole biblical story all the way through. He's naming names and explaining what went wrong. So yeah, so this, in this history, you may not be familiar with it, but there is a theologian in Adventism that did a very sinister work in terms of promoting the false theology of Desmond Ford. And his name is Heppenstall, Edward Heppenstall, who has lots of books in the public record. He was an educator, and people that are on the wrong side of the issue on the nature of man, the nature of Christ, and overcoming sin, he's one of their champions. And you got this look on your face like you know Heppenstall, and I'm talking to you, no? Okay, all right. I can't read faces real well. Okay, how many have heard of Heppenstall? Okay, two hands, all right. But at Hope International, I'm educated on why Heppenstall's influences was negative. Okay, he's teaching apostate Protestant doctrine. So let me read you this comment about Paulson. Okay, it says this. Let me remind you of some things before we go on. Throwing away our understanding of the Pope of Rome is the beginning. The end, you're going to be bowing down to the Son. Jesus illustrates the end with the beginning. So when this General Conference president is saying, hey, the Antichrist of Bible prophecy and the man of sin, no problem, we don't believe that anymore. He's the first generation that is setting up the problem with the last generation, because they're going to bow down to the man of sin at the Sunday law. You follow me? Okay, so he qualifies there in that generation. The secret chambers is what was going on in the time of Falkenberg. Lots of secret manipulation behind the scenes. And here in 1919, the person that is associated with the 1919 Bible Conference is W.W. Prescott. He's the one that takes the prophetic message out, and they turn his presentations into the book called the Doctrine of Christ, which today our theologians call Christology, okay, which is apostate Protestantism's definition of Christ. So you can't, this third generation, if you're going to put a name on it, it's W.W. Prescott. Follow me? Okay, so now let's talk about this third generation of Paulson. Here's what it says. Paulson was the first World Church president to hold a doctrinal degree, which he earned from the University of Tübingen in Germany. It doesn't sound, it should. The University of Tübingen, if you go back into history, it's one of the universities that was started by the Protestants way back when. Okay, 1600, 1700, whatever it was started. It's a Protestant university, powerful Protestant university. So powerful that it became the top of the list for the Jesuits to infiltrate and take over, which they did. Okay, it's now Jesuit-influenced university, and it is so because it was such a prominent Protestant university that they purposely marked it to take it over, which they did. Okay, so Paulson was the first World Church president to hold a doctorate degree, which he earned from the University of Tübingen in Germany. Pope Benedict XVI, born Joseph Ratzinger, served as Pope as sovereign of Vatican City from 2005 until his resignation in 2013, graduated from the same university. Okay, so that's the kind of university it does. It produces popes. Okay. Yeah, Ratzinger was the head. No, okay, but all right. So next paragraph. Paulson says he considers the late Edward Heppenstall, a longtime Adventist seminary professor, to have been a key theological mentor. This guy says his doctrinal hero is Heppenstall. But this report here goes on. It says, it's going to tell us about Heppenstall now. Not the way I told it. Edward Heppenstall was profoundly influenced by the Bible teacher W.W. Prescott, with his Christ-centered approach and his emphasis on righteousness by faith. Prescott, having been present at the famous Minneapolis Conference of 1888, here again we note the important formative influence on Heppenstall's theology. So this president says my theological hero is Heppenstall, but everyone knows that Heppenstall's theological hero is W.W. Prescott. So if you can see it, this guy is the third generation, which puts Ted in a rather negative light. He's the one that's going to bow down to the Son. And what we're saying, we're on the verge of a Sunday law. And the last General Conference president and the last Republican president, their election is in 2020. How far off is 2020? Okay, so we're approaching this full speed ahead. So now I'm at the point that I wanted to share, and I'll share this. Take a minute, but I'll share it. And we'll close. There is much more to say. I'm not even scraping the surface on these presidents yet. I'm just dealing with this.
You didn't have any U.S. presidents up there.
I didn't touch U.S. presidents, but I want to talk about this guy. Okay, when I was at Hope International in Heartland, I think Kathy and I were baptized in 1977. 76, because I was 25 years old and I was born in 51. So we were baptized in 76. So anything I know about Advent history before 76, or where I've learned thereafter, okay? And when I went to Hope International is when I get this crash course on new theology about the inroads of Desmond Ford's teachings and Heppenstall's and those other men. And I listened, I learned, but it wasn't, I was just fascinated with prophecy, so I didn't get that fully drawn into it. But I remember, and I'm not exaggerating this, and as I've told this story here recently over the past few months, some of you probably heard this story, there's been people that are more familiar with that history than myself that confirm it. And what they confirm is that this president, whose name was Pearson, and Pearson, his presidency ends in 1979. What would that mean? It ends right where the final warning of Daniel 11 is introduced. It's your last chance to understand Daniel 11. The proxy war of Afghanistan has begun. This guy has just ended his presidency. But when I was at Hope National in Heartland, I remember these guys love this General Conference president. I had a hard time. I did not take the time to look into the history of Adventism close enough to understand the dichotomy that the leaders of Hope International and Heartland and some of the other ministries we were working with, Steps to Life and them, how they could have such a negative take on these General Conference presidents and even these that come before them. But they like this guy. They like this guy so much that he actually, in his last presentation at the General Conference, he gave a sermon, and they liked him so much that they reprinted his sermon more than once in their publications at Heartland and in the Firm Foundation magazine. And when I was telling this story, brief story in Sabbath school class 4 or 5 Sabbaths ago, who was it? Someone sitting in the front pew above us. Anyway, they reminded me that particular sermon of Pearson we'd have actually published.
We printed it. I think it was Daniel, maybe.
Yeah, Daniel and Deborah. Daniel and Deborah said, you printed that in your magazine as well. And I'd forgot about it. Years ago, because of this emphasis of Hope and Heartland about who this guy represented and this final sermon was good, we put it in our monthly newsletter, and I'd forgot that we did so until about 6 weeks ago when someone said, no, you had it in yours too. So the influence of Hope and Heartland leadership lifting this guy up even impacted me, even though I'm still saying I don't fully understand it. So what I want you to see here in closing that kind of blows my mind is just here in the past short period of time, we've went back to that sermon because of the study of these presidents. Okay, now I hope I've set enough concepts in place where you can get the implications of this. Who is this guy? Who typified this guy? Josiah. Josiah tries to reform. Does it work? No, it doesn't work. Okay, because you're on your way into Babylon. You can't stop the onslaught. But here's Pearson. He's known for working a reform, and he's going to attempting to work a reform, and he's going to give his last shot on making that Reformation take place in Adventism. And this is that sermon from 1978. Okay, he's finishing his General Conference presidency, and it's at the annual council of the General Conference staff and the employees of the Review and Herald. And this is what it says. This will be the last time in my present role I shall stand before the world leaders of my church, your church, our church, and I have a few words to leave with you. Okay, now here's what blows my mind. Even though we had printed this in our newsletter, I knew about it at Hope and Heartland, and I remembered it, this final appeal, but I didn't remember the details of it. And when I was at Hope and Heartland, there's no way that I knew anything about the 4 generations of Adventism. We did not begin to get confronted with the 4 generations of Adventism until after the 2520, which came in 2005. When the 2520 comes in 2005, then point by point of this truth develops. It's years later before we really start focusing in on the 4 generations. Do you know when the first time the 4 generations was presented in this movement? Right around 2014. Why? Because the first time Joel was presented, I presented it. And I wasn't making a big deal about it, but I was at a camp meeting where there were other ministries there, and I pointed out that in the first 3 or 4 verses, I forget now, of Joel chapter 1, that you can see 4 generations. And then I made the connection, well, it all takes place in the 4th generation based upon the 10 Commandments, so on and so forth. And the split in this movement begins to take place. And one of the ministries that left, one of the primary ministries that left, one of their arguments is that there isn't 4 generations in Joel. Elder Pippenger's wrong, there's 5. Go read it. Read it. There's 4 generations on 2 witnesses in there. So anyway, that's like the 2014 time period. That's when and at that point we didn't understand it. So it gets opened up in 2014, and this other light that we're sharing here has been coming thereafter. But I remembered Pearson's appeal. Okay, so we're starting into his appeal, Josiah's appeal. He says, this will be the last time. And he says, I take my thoughts from something that Elder and Mrs. Ralph Neal have written describing how typically a sect evolves into a church. So I'm going to give you a sermon, I'm taking it from some people's information about how a church is formed. They say that a sect is often begun by a charismatic leader with tremendous drive and commitment, and that it arises as a protest against worldliness and formalism in the church. It is generally embraced by the poor. The rich would lose too much by joining it, since it is unpopular, despised, and persecuted by society in general. It has definite beliefs firmly held by zealous members. Each member makes a personal decision to join it and knows what he believes. There is little organization or property, and there are few buildings. The group has strict standards and controls on behavior. Preachers, often without education, arise by inner compulsion. There is little concern about public relations. So she's talking about the beginning of a church. Then the next paragraph, you know what he says? And then it passes on to the 2nd generation. And that's there. And then it passes on to the 2nd generation. With growth, there comes a need for organization. In the 3rd generation. And he's going to explain that. In the 4th generation. He uses the 4 generations as his altar call that we're going into apostasy and we need to turn around. Okay, did you get that the Lord, Josiah's final appeal, his attempt at reformation, is based upon these 4 generations. And it's not much longer than that. Brethren and sisters, this must, okay, talking about the 4th generation, the last part of that paragraph says, the movement seeks to become relevant to contemporary society by becoming involved with popular causes. Services become formal. The group enjoys complete acceptance by the world. The sect has become a church. And then he says, brethren and sisters, this must never happen to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This will not happen to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is not just another church. It is God's church. And from that point on, he's pleading with them not to let it happen. So what I'm suggesting to you is this, and I can bring this to conclusion. There's many lines that you can bring together on the 7 thunders that produce wonderful light in all kinds of directions. And there's much light out of the presidents of the United States, the Republican presidents, and the presidents of the General Conference. I'm only taking one snippet. And I'm taking the last 7 General Conference presidents, even though I didn't name these. to show you 4 generations, and then to show you Josiah. And I'm saying, I think it's virtually impossible that you could take the last 7 General Conference presidents and find that the one that would line up with Josiah would be the one that everyone knows is the one that tried to work a reformation, even as Josiah tried to work a reformation. That's impossible. But in terms of who is to recognize this truth, it's this movement. This movement is the only group of people on planet Earth that has the intellectual ability, based upon this message that has been delivered to them, to recognize the significance of 4 generations. And when Josiah here, Pearson, attempts this work of reformation, he puts the very call for revival and reformation into the context of these 4 generations that cover all of Advent history. It just couldn't have. The Lord had to have His hand in all that. Okay, had to have His hand in all that. And therefore, I hope you've noticed that there's 20 General Conference presidents and 19 Republican presidents. And it's 2019. Okay. That brings us to 2020, which is the time that the next president of either case is to be elected.
Wow.
Do you see it? So, in this movement right now, there are certain things that I understand that are shaking it. Okay? The Lord, I have no qualms. Somebody in Africa was getting aggressive. They were one of my disciples, evidently. They had understood the prophetic message the way I teach it, and they're one of the Africans that has got pretty good aptitude. You know, one of them that's already known that they understand the message pretty well. But he was getting pretty militant about wanting everyone to see that, hey, Parminder's teaching a different message. It's getting to the context where he's saying, you know, this is heretical. And I got involved with that, and my statement to him was, and this is what I'm going to share with you about Parminder's teachings, because it's true. I still have family members that aren't converted, that aren't trying to be Seventh-day Adventists, that need to get their head on straight and walk with the Lord before probation closes. And if I had to choose a human being that the Lord would use to go win them to the truth, if I had to choose one, it'd be Parminder. That's the kind of confidence that I have in that guy. So he and I are not at odds, and we're not scared of each other. If I think he said something that it might be incorrect, I go up and I'll ask him what he means by that, and I've never found us at odds. So that's what I told this African brother, back off. And this is before we began to realize, well, what it is that he has the model of the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy, and I've been teaching the model of the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy, but we're using the identical methodology. And we all know in our methodology that William Miller teaches that symbols can have more than one meaning. So if I'm applying a symbol in the history of the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy, and he takes that very same symbol and he applies it differently in the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy, if it fits by context, it's totally acceptable. But these guys with the sharp aptitude, they could see what looked like it was a problematic differences, but we hadn't reached the point to where we were recognizing the transition from Elijah to Elisha, from John to Christ, as actually taking place. I think that's where we're at. So that's one of the things that's confronting this movement right now. One of the things that's confronting this movement right now is definite time. We dealt a little bit with that here. I think on the covenant lines for me, even without being able to explain every statement in the spirit of prophecy about no more time setting, I can see that all these covenant lines identify that just before probation closes, definite time is opened up to God's people. To think that he would do it over and over again and then get to the conclusion of it all and not do it it's not having a message that's based upon time. My conviction about the validity of it is based upon the line upon line, not about time. that answers some of Sister White's statements for me. There is what we're dealing with here. There's some people want to know, why do I have to be rebaptized? Okay, so baptism is an issue that we've been dealing with. But one of the issues that we've been dealing with is November 9th. And when that came to pass, when Tess presented her material at Arkansas, Theodore was right there on the spot, and Theodore is one of these guys that has this aptitude on chronology and math. And the Lord used him to provide a second witness from a totally different direction to November 9th, 2019. I saw that as the Lord confirming Tess's message. But at the same point in time, the brethren in Africa, they're opening up these presidents. So then there begins to be a little bit of controversy. Is Theodore's message a counterfeit to keep us away from looking at Tess's message? Or are the president's line, is that a distraction from looking at Tess's or whatever? People start seeing these new lines of prophecy that seem to be profound coming up at the same point in time and wondering, are they all valid, or are they one or two of them, possibly distractions so we don't connect with the truth as we should? And one of the things that came in during that time period, I'm sure some of you are aware of it, but if you go into the writings of Sister White, when she talks about the first angel, it's a singular angel when she describes it. Or when the second angel, it's a singular angel. Or when the third angel comes, she'll portray it as a singular angel. But when she talks about the midnight cry, she talks about many angels. Did you notice that? Have you ever noticed it? That's how she says it. This is the empowerment of the second angel's message. The second angel is a singular angel, but when the midnight cry comes, there are several angels that come and join with it. So if you read early writings, you'll see it. Perhaps it would be easy to dig it out if you isolated the book Early Writings and typed in angels in the plural. But in any case, it's valid. It's there. So we're understanding that in October of last year, for the priest, the loud cry, the midnight cry, the message that has been typified for the midnight cry for the priest arrives. And at this same point in time, we have several lines of truth popping up. And so for me, I've been saying, from my evaluation, none of them are erroneous. That they're all coming together into one package. So I've given you a snippet of the presidents, just a little bit. I would tell you that Tabot has been presenting this. So if you do a web search on Tabot's recent presentations, you can go get the presidents more in detail by far than this. You should be looking at Tess's presentations, I think. And then
From Arkansas,
from everywhere. From Arkansas, but here recently, and I haven't looked at it, but here recently I'm hearing from people that what she taught in Australia, which was after Arkansas, is just as essential to look at as the Arkansas ones. So I would go look for Tess based upon the recent time period, since October, wherever you can download her. And then to bring this whole thing to a conclusion here today, I would say the other thing that's going on is baptism. And I've been doing a presentation on the number 8, which deals with baptism and deals with the priest being lifted up as a first fruit offering in order to bring the Levites in. And in that presentation, I give arguments about why we need to be baptized. But I think I like Tamina's logic on baptism, because she goes through histories that we don't typically use. The history of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And when she draws, and some histories that we do know, when she draws a line upon line, she demonstrates that at the same point that we're at in our prophetic line, baptism becomes an issue. In fact, if you're like me, you don't know a great deal about Christian history, but I do know the name Anabaptist. And I know it comes out of Europe. And she goes back into that history, and that history is about a shaking over being rebaptized. Okay, so she goes through historical line after line that shows that when we get to this point in our line, it will be an issue again.
Tamina from the last camp meeting.
Tamina from the last camp meeting. Then you can also, on that line, you can look for Pippenger and Tabot, because Pippenger and Tabot have both did presentations, and not a singular presentation, 2, maybe 3, where they go through the vows that we handed out this morning, or began to hand out, and their presentations are just walking through the vows one at a time. And if we're going to follow through here and come back, and those of you that choose to follow on and get baptized, if we're going to go through this process, your self-education in advance of our next meeting would be ideal. If when we got here there was really, not much to go through. So if you can look at those, Tamina, in terms of line up on line, mine on the number 8, but there's a bunch of other things in there as well, and then Tabot and Pippenger on just walking through the vows. Yes?
I was going to say, there's, in October, at the School of the Prophets, Philip, I think it's Philip,
Yes.
does November 9 Simplified. And that helped me a great lot to understand, what's his name? November. Theodore's presentation. So it's Philip. What's his last name? I don't know.
Iorden.
Yes, it's called November 9 Simplified. And
We can't pronounce these Eastern European last names either.
Lambert or School of
It's from the School of the Prophets, and it's end of October.
Philip.
When Theodore was, after Tess left, Theodore was doing his presentation, and I got really frustrated with Theodore, because he'd get up there and he'd do a line, he'd put his chronology on, and right when you think you have it, then he'd start throwing these other dates on top, and I told him, quit doing that. Even in public, some of us were saying, I was reaching the point where I was almost at the point where I believed he was doing it on purpose, so he could preserve himself as the only expert, rather than let you become an expert by really understanding it. He'll just, I was thinking that kind of thing, but I was at a frustration point where I took Philip and Tamina and Antonesia. And I said, take Theodore's presentations he's been doing and simplify them, and you're going to go in the classroom and you're going to do them. So
Tamina's is great too. She goes over Tess's and does it really simplified.
Tess was there in October. After October at the School of the Prophets, if you go ahead and look at Theodore's stuff, but then make sure you look at Tamina, Antonesia, and Philip's stuff, following up on Theodore's, and then some of these other subjects, it will help you get caught up on November 9th. And I'll tell you out front here, everyone I know that I have a certain amount of confidence in their prophetic aptitude that is looking at Tess's material understands that it's not set in concrete. For instance, when she's doing her revolutionary lines, I don't know that she taught it or some of us taught it thereafter, that the Russian Revolution was on November 9th. And Allah has pointed out, no, the Russian Revolution wasn't on November 9th. So I don't know that Tess actually says that, but I think I've said it thereafter. But there was some things that Tess said that didn't square with me. The first period of the French Revolution she called the Reign of Terror, and she had it marked as 4 years. And I'd already settled into a long time ago the Reign of Terror is 1 year, and I'm still settled into it. So there was this discrepancy there that she was saying it was 4 years, and I know it's 1 year. So we've had some discussions, Pippenger and myself, about this right off the bat. And where we're at on this is that we're not saying that every little detail that she's taught is perfect, but the structure it's sound. So we're relating to that information is that there's still some fine tuning that needs to be handled on that. But without a doubt, it's come into our history at the point where the waymark that it would be marking is the midnight cry. And the midnight cry leads to the closed door. And the midnight cry, the latter rain, Sister White says, goes like fire in the stubble. So it goes very quickly. And as I said last night about my old age, and some of you other people here, it's February, what is that? March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. It's 9 months. That's
Pregnancy.
a pregnancy. That's you find out your wife's pregnant, and the next thing you wake up to is you're in the hospital and there's the baby. That's how fast it goes. So we're on borrowed time, but we're the most privileged people on planet Earth because we've got all this background prophetic information to help us sort through these things if we choose to do so. Questions?
Are you gonna be here a while? So we go over and get you close if you want.
No, I'm going to pray and we're going to break.
Any questions?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're living in troublous times, and much of the trouble that is about to break upon us we don't even see. It's behind the scenes. But we know from your prophetic word that there's a great crisis about to confront your church and the world. And we thank you that you've given us the light from your prophetic word that gives us opportunity to prepare, gives us opportunity to be among those that present this final warning message to the audience that you would have us present it to. I ask a blessing upon this little group here in this part of the vineyard, that you would continue to help them grow up into a knowledge of you, a knowledge of your Son, and a knowledge of this prophetic message. We need to do some follow-up here in the near future on some of these subjects about baptism and so forth, and we ask that according to your will that you will open the way providentially one way or another to make that happen. We thank you for bringing us here at this time period and blessing us with these studies. And as we part ways, we ask for traveling mercies, and we ask a blessing upon those that have put their effort and labor into organizing and arranging these past few days' studies. Thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.